All right, appreciate everyone coming today. My name's Tony Martin. I'm from Elmore, Alabama. Lived there all my life. What we're going to be doing today is we have a cam brake set up, as 90% of our old trucks have. We're going to look at how it operates, how we can identify some worn parts whenever you get ready to rebuild a setup like this, and how to make it work like new. And then on this side we've got a wedge brake setup, which was popular mainly with fleets, but they tended to get used everywhere through the 60s and 70s. There's still a lot out there today on our old trucks. Unfortunately, whenever you go to the repair shop with something like this, they have no idea what you have, and if you go to the parts store to buy parts, you get the same response. So we're going to look at how this setup works, and I'm going to talk about parts a little bit for those, and who knows, we might pull the hub off and look at the internal parts and how all that works. So anyway, we're going to start with this cam brake setup here. The basic parts: this is your brake chamber, which actuates the system. This is known as a piggyback chamber, or some people call them maxis, some people call them spring brakes, parking brakes, whatever. This section is the parking brake. There's a very heavy spring inside that applies the brake when you take air away. The port nearest this end of your chamber with the two ports, the port nearest this end actuates the parking brake. The port on this end actuates your service brake, which works with your foot pedal to stop whenever you're rolling down the road. So the very first thing that we need to do here is release this parking brake before we can do any type maintenance, because everything's in an applied position right now. Your chamber works through the actuating rod to the slack adjuster. It's called that because you adjust the slack in your brake with this. There's a little adjuster right here, and whenever we get started, I'll show how to back off on the tension and tighten the tension up. Then this is the actual S-cam that's doing our braking. It's what forces the shoes out against the drum. Inside we've got some rollers that roll on the cam. We've got our shoes and we've got our drum. The piece here that your shoes attach to and your cam comes through, that's known as the spider. I'll go ahead and explain that now in case I get a little bit later and reference that as the spider and y'all start looking around trying to stomp the spider that's climbing on the floor. But we don't have to worry about those today. So that's the cam brake setup. Here with the wedge brakes, you notice we've got two chambers, but they're much smaller. Same basic design. These are only service brake chambers. They don't have parking brakes on them. Some of the wedge brakes did have a parking brake. These don't, so they're a little simpler. They screw in here, and they have a actual wedge on the end that forces the shoes apart. We'll look at this in a few minutes, but this end comes apart as well as this end. It puts uniform pressure against your drum to stop. So as you can see, there's nothing on the outside that you can actually see to see if these are operating. On the inside, there are two adjusters that are fairly hard to get to that you use to take the slack out of your shoe. Much harder to adjust these than it is the cam brake, but we'll see those in a few minutes. But to start with, the very first thing we need to do is what's known as cage the parking brake. Never, ever, 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 ever try to take this clamp off or do anything with this end of the chamber, because this spring will take body parts off, ones you may need later. So we're going to put air to it. If you notice, it releases, but we're not going to leave air connected to it this whole time. So they provided a handy little tool right here on the side in this little T-shaped bolt with a washer and a nut. So you pop the dust cap out of the end, and if you'll notice inside, I may need to rotate that around, but inside there's a little socket that this fits in, and you push it in, you turn it a quarter turn, and it locks in. Those ears lock in. And whenever they lock in, you just run your nut down, and that's all you need to do. You don't need a tool. And now when we take air pressure off, it holds this spring compressed. The parking brake is released. So if you've got a trailer or a truck that you need to move that's got parking brakes on it, hopefully it still has the release bolts in it. If not, they're pretty well universal. You can snag some somewhere else and release your parking brakes the same way. You don't have to worry about the air system. Just put some kind of fitting in the chamber in the outermost port, release it, and get a lock-off bolt in it, and you can cage it. So now this is attached to the service side. So when you're going down the road with the brakes released and you get ready to stop and you apply air pressure, the service port comes on and pushes it out the same way as the parking brake did, except where the parking brake was using spring pressure to apply it, now we're using air pressure to apply it. And if you watch, the shoes are going to move in and out whenever I do that. So we're actuating the cam. So if you notice, it's moving this rod in and out, and whenever you get inspected and they check your brake travel, that's what they're looking at. You can mark your actuating rod with the brakes released, apply them, check your measurement, and it doesn't need to exceed 2 inches. You need a little bit of travel because you don't want your brakes dragging, but you don't need to exceed 2 inches of travel. That's where your slack adjuster comes in. You will if you have a truck, you should carry a 9/16 wrench with you. 9/16 wrench fits your adjuster. It's not universal which way you turn this to release it. You have to trial and error because based on the orientation of the slack adjuster to the cam, which side of the axle the cam's on, all sorts of different things as to whether you're going to tighten this or loosen this. So we're going to put the wrench on it and we're going to turn it, and if you look inside you can see the cam in here, and we are loosening it off because we're going to take this drum off and we need clearance to be able to do that. So we're going to back the brake off.
On an automatic slack, is it the same basic thing?
Yes, and I actually have one I can show here. Not installed, but I'll show you in just a second.
Still the same idea.
Same basic idea of backing it off. It's just a little different process. So we back that off. There are dozens of different type of automatic slack adjusters. This is one I happen to have laying around the shop. It goes on here, this clevis threads on, and it operates. Now, if you imagine when this operates, it pulls this pin and releases it each time. That ratchets the cam inside around to keep your slack out. All it takes is one little spot on the cam inside or the ratchet rather, to stop adjusting. Just because you have these doesn't mean your brakes are always adjusted. The little square on the top of this one is where you back it off. So just put an adjustable wrench on that, and again, it's not always universal which way is tight and which way is loose. Turn it and back the slack off of your brake drum. So we've got that. We've got our brake released here. We've taken the slack out of our slack adjuster. So let's turn this around now and look at the other side. So we've got a drum on here, and I'll take it off and show it to you, but here on the inside of this hub, there's a machined area that the drum should rest against. It should not be aligned by the studs. This is known as the pallet. If you notice, this drum does not fit the pallet. So it is not safe to operate this setup with the drum not fitting the pallet. That is the key measurement to get when you're replacing drums. Don't always assume that the setup that you have is done correctly. Measure your pallet, make sure the drum fits. Don't rely on your studs. So, no, there's at least 3 different common ones. So we will there are numerous dollies for this and numerous different ways to do this. Unfortunately, we're going to do this the hard way. This is not a light piece, but if you will notice, there's a deep groove right here in the outside. There's a measurement of 16 and 7/8 inches, 16 and 5/8 inches, excuse me, on this particular type brake. So we're going to look here, and you can see we're at 16 and 5/8, and we're not even to the wear surface of the drum. So this has far exceeded its wear point. So drum's got to go. So we're going to put it over to the side, and as you can see, the pallet here, you'd measure this. This looks like a 9-inch bore. That's one of the more common ones. 8 3/4 is another one. 8 7/8 is another one. So be sure to measure that and make sure you get the right drum. I've run into that numerous times of the drum not fitting the hub. So with that out, we have our shoes, and
They might be worn down too.
well, you know, they're almost to the rivets, and they've got some serious cracks across them, and I would say they probably were used too much when they were new. So we're going to remedy that problem.
State Patrol will say right there.
These shoes are pinned on. This is known as a Rockwell style P spider. If you go down to your local truck parts dealer with this type shoe, which was extremely common in the 70s and early 80s, they're going to look at you with the deer in the headlights look. And they're going to say, we don't have anything like that. And you're going to go home disappointed and say, how will I ever have brakes on my truck? We're going to find out how to remedy that problem in just a second. So, first thing we need to look at here before we take anything apart is our cam comes through from the inside, and this is known as the head of the cam. And this should be stationary. Well, doesn't look very stationary. So that tells us we have a bad bushing here in the outside. So what this will cause is your bottom shoe, when you get your adjustment right, your bottom shoe is always going to be dragging on the drum. The top one is where your clearance will be. So when you apply your brakes, the first thing that has to happen is the shoe set up to get centered up, and then it applies. We don't want any of that. Whenever you step on the pedal, we want it to stop as quickly as possible. So we're going to check this little issue out. So pick your shoe up, and we got to flip the roller out. That's a roller. And we're going to flip this other one out. And we have those out. Now, there's a spring inside. And to get to that spring, we're going to pick up on this shoe, and that gives you enough slack to take the spring out. Without removing the rollers, you shouldn't be able to do that. There should be tension on the spring all the time. If there's not tension on the spring, that means your spring's stretched and it's not doing its job. So we take that loose, and we've got 2 brake shoes hanging here. So to get those out, we're going to pull the clips. Give it a little tap. And of course, it wants to be stubborn. Why wouldn't it be? I mean, it's not like we're recording this or anything. Of course, if I'd been smart, I would have took this the other way so I could actually hit it. There we go. It was raining. I figured, what point is it in lubricating it if it's raining anyway? So that one comes out. We've got our shoes off. And again, notice the full circle end that are held securely with the pins. That's obsolete nowadays. So now we're left with our worn cam. And we got to figure out what to do with that. So we have our trusty cam repair kit. Dozens of different variations on these. When you go to get one, they're going to want to know what your outside bushing is, what your inside bushing is. The cam diameter is going to tell them that, and the OD of the spider where it goes in. All this is held together with snap rings. So we got one that holds the slack adjuster on. We'll take that off, and the spacer washers. And then on this one, we got another one on the inside. And we're going to take it off. We're going to slide that down and get some slack. And now we can move our cam out to disengage the slack adjuster. Oh my. There we go. So you can do a little manipulation and get your cam out. Cams are directional. There's left hand and right hand. That does not refer to which side of the truck it's on. When you look at the head of your cam, if it makes an S, it's a right hand. This makes a backwards S, so it's a left hand. When you go to get a new cam, you measure from under the head to the end of the snap ring, where your end snap ring groove is, your diameter, and your number of splines, if it's right hand or left hand, and that'll tell you which cam you need.
Where's the wear in that? Right on the edge?
Right here. This will wear egg-shaped, and if it's not worn out, every time I change a pair of shoes, I flip the cam over. Because typically, it's going to ride this way and wear the bottom, and depending on which side of the axle it's on when you apply the brakes, it's going to slam up against it, and you're going to wear on the other side. So it's possible to have all your wear on one side. It's possible to equal it out. I always just flip it over. Unless it's egg-shaped. If it's egg-shaped, got to replace it. For our purposes, we're going to pretend this one is not egg-shaped, and we're going to put it back in. So, being as this is a Rockwell, they use this little metal sleeve as a wear sleeve, and if you notice it's got a groove in it, so that gives you this much of a chance to line up with a grease port that comes through right here. Believe it or not, you're actually supposed to grease these. I'm sure few people ever did, but there was a grease fit in there anyway. You put your sleeve in like that, then you put your bushing in, and I'm probably not going to have enough slack to get the cam back in that way, so if the inside comes with a replacement, I'm not going to put that in, but as you can see, this has just got 4 bolts, and it's going to just bolt right in place of this one. Exactly, yes. This one has already got one here where it's drilled and tapped. The replacements already have them in the bushing, so you just turn your zerk away from it, so it's going to grease internally, pretend it doesn't even have that. If you're working on a tractor brake as opposed to a trailer, it's got a solid tube and there's a bushing in each end of the tube. You just bump those out and change them. Trailers will have some sort of a interchangeable inner piece, be it 4-bolt, be it 2-bolt. Some of them are spherical and you roll them in and roll them out, but at any rate, that's how that is. That's your inner bushing. Trailer cams are generally long, truck cams are generally short. So we've got our bushing changed.
So this is a trailer cam?
This is a trailer axle, yes. Whole lot more room to work on it, and it's out in the open so you can see it. A lot of the truck is enclosed in that tube, and you can't see it operate quite as well. So we got that, and our handy little kit comes with an assortment . You want us to put it on the outside? You can, yeah, that'll be fine. I might have bumped it. All right, thanks, sir. So your kit comes with an assortment of washers and snap rings. The inside of the cam is generally smaller than the outside. So that's so it goes in easier. You don't have to force all the snap rings on. This is going to just slide right on there. So the larger one's to the outside. And your cams you'll find listed that way. It'll say the head diameter and the inner diameter, slack adjuster in. So we're going to get those started, and we're going to put this back, and we're going to line it up with our slack adjuster. Get right back in, slide our bushing in place, and lo and behold, look at the slack we took out of that. On the washers, ideally, you want to take the slack out so this cam can't slide in and out. I'll show you the importance of that in just a second, but you want to take the slack out with that. And you may need 2 washers, you may need 1. You always have to have 1, but that's going to depend on your particular spider and your particular cam. So we put the snap ring back in place, hopefully. This is much more fun to do laying under the truck with dirt falling in your face. That's in place, and we'll need a small washer and a small snap ring for the inside. And again, you want to put enough on it to hold everything snug. You don't want slack so the cam can move in and out. You want to keep it as tight as you can without it binding. And that's the other thing in doing this. You want to make sure, a lot of times your cam, we're dealing with a loose cam. A lot of times the bushings will swell from years of non-use. The cams will rust and it'll bind, and your brake won't release. A lot of times that's the cause of your brake not releasing, is your cam being seized in your bushings. There again, you can put new bushings in, clean your cam up, and you're good to go. Not a real big deal, but finding the problem is a deal. It's not always an air problem that causes the brake to hang. So, we got that on, and now we have our problem with our shoes. So, some parts people know this, Some don't. Unfortunately, the number who know this is dwindling. This shoe with the anchor pin is exactly the same as this shoe, which is extremely common nowadays, except you have a different mounting connection on this end. Well, our handy hardware kit comes with new pivot pins. And guess what? The pivot pins fit where the anchor pins came from. And our shoes will fit right on in place and work like they're supposed to. Unfortunately, I did not put the little clips in the shoes before we got here. So this is the piece that your spring pivots on, hangs on inside. They do not come in the shoe, they come in your hardware kit. You start it in there. Give it a little love tap. And now we have a shoe that will drop in place. We have our spring that's going to go underneath, or in the slack adjuster end. And instead of the anchor pins, we have these springs that go on this end. So what you do, make sure the paint is not binding it, is hang your springs in place and drop it over and swing it around. And same as when we did the other one, you're going to pick this up. Do you get some slack? And be a contortionist and get the spring to hook in place. Need to get the slack on move my slack adjuster around right so we're sitting flat. Because any turn to the slack adjuster and it will not give you enough slack to hook the spring up. And apparently with this being a new spring, it's not wanting to cooperate either. So, for our purposes, pretend I put a new spring on it. But we're going to put one that's stretched just a little bit. Yes. And it's very tricky to get to. In real life, I'd sit here and manipulate that slack adjuster until I got it just right. And then the spring will hook. Sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes you have to use a bar, get it to slip over it. But I've been known to do that for 15 minutes trying to get it to line up.
So do you have to say golly gee or something like that?
I try to really hold my tongue and think positive thoughts and that type thing, but so we've got our shoes on, we've got new springs. You can pretend the other spring's new, please do. We've got new cam bushings. As you can tell, there's a problem here because we've got new rollers. And if you notice, the old rollers that came out were smooth, and these rollers are knurled. So it actually, when it rolls on the cam, it forces this roller to turn. You get this little wire clip that goes over the roller, and we're going to attempt to put this in place. push the little clip in. And the same here. Just give a little slack, push the clip in. There we go. And we're tight. We got our slack out. We've got our new style shoes on. We've got our new hardware kit. And there again, if you use your imagination a few minutes, we're going to roll this new drum over here and put it on. We had the paint man doctor this up so it looked old, patina it, but we're going to put our new drum on. And the trick here is lining up the stud so it goes on. And now that we have it on, that's all you need to do. And we're going to put a couple of nuts on there to hold the drum in place. Now, let's see. Imagine that. It turns again.
If you pull up to a scale, would a DOT guy notice that the wedges aren't lined up on that drum?
Possibly. If it's an inopportune time, yes, he will. If you've got lots of time and got an extra drum laying on the deck plate, he'll never see it.
Got it.
So we're going to move this mess back out of the way. No, sir, not really. Well, normally the trailer or the truck is sitting still and I'm the one moving around. And I don't have an audience to make sure they can see it. It's just one of my dogs licking me in the face or on the arm or something and saying, yeah, you're doing a good job. So now we got everything together and we put air to it. It works, but we're not making contact. And look how far our actuator traveled. So what we need to do is adjust our brake. So we're going to depress the lock and go around here till we get snug. And for our purposes, we're going to back off a quarter turn. That is kind of the universal accepted standard. It's best to measure your rod travel. If you back off a quarter turn and everything is in reasonable condition, that's going to give you about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches of travel by backing off a quarter turn. So now, with that simple adjustment, now we're moving out and we're holding. So we're good. And then we'd uncage our parking brake and this would be ready to go. So now, having said that, let's see how our time's running. We got a few more minutes. Let's take one of these wedge brake actuators apart and let's take a look at that. In their infinite wisdom, making these chambers, the air port won't clear the axle. So to take this apart, you have to take the chamber apart. And that's what we're going to do. They already come in at an angle, but not enough an angle. So since we don't have a parking brake, we can do this. And we take the bolt out of the clamp, throw the tools off on the floor, because that's where it should have been in the first place, and take the cap off, and here's your clamp. And that frees us up our room so we can turn it. So we're going to take a little punch. Oh, that's an original. And if you happen to have it apart and decide it's a good time to change it, if you can find those, it's a good time to do that. So there's a little lock that we're going to release. That should have our lock released. And we are going to unscrew this chamber. Now, the other chambers are held on with two 5/8 studs universally. You take those two nuts off and the chamber comes out. This is what the inside of a wedge brake looks like, and this is what actually makes it work. This is your actuating chamber, your plunger, and this is your wedge. Uses these two rollers to force between two plungers inside, pushes the shoe out. So it has one of these on each side. They come out uniformly. These rollers can get flat-sided, or they can break. The actual chambers can be put in wrong and not have enough travel. So the inside of the spider has a rectangle receptacle that this goes in and holds it in the proper relation to your pistons that are actually going to actuate your shoes. So it'll only go in the one way, and you screw it back in and tighten it. So now that we have done that, I didn't spend all this work cleaning. First off, I have to tell you a quick story about taking this apart, and then you'll understand why I need to show it to you. I took this axle out of the scrap pile, brought it up to the shop, worked for an hour trying to get the hubs off of it because the drums were stuck to the shoes, haphazardly taking things apart. This was sitting on a stand. I pulled the drum off, and I thought, what is that laying on top of the axle? And about that time, the what that was laying on top of the axle fell off on the ground and started crawling away. It was a cottonmouth about this long that was curled up behind the brake shoes on top of the spindle, and apparently that's where it had spent its winter, and it didn't bother me dragging it out with a backhoe, bringing it up to the shop, beating on this with a sledgehammer, beating on those with sledgehammers, cutting with a torch, and everything else. The snake was still there, but I relocated him, and everybody's happy. It was still attached, and he was going the other direction, and I thought that was a great direction for him to go. I didn't want to disturb him. No, I'm from the south, but not that far south. We still run from them in Alabama. We don't eat them. So, having done that, I had an impact wrench right here in front of me. Yes, sir. Oh, thank you, sir. I'm not going to, well, actually I am. Never mind. I told the story. I'm going to turn this around because there's something you need to see from this side. So I took the oil cap off, and that exposed our axle nuts. If there was no other way of knowing this, we know this is a trailer axle because that's not a hex nut. That's an octagon nut. So please don't use a chisel. Buy yourself an octagon socket for axle nuts. It's got a little star lock. We'll see here in just a second. We're going to take the lock nut off. We're going to pull the locks off. It has two locks. As you can see, this one has a tab, fits in a groove on the spindle, and it has a ring of holes that align with this pin sticking out of the nut. When you get your inner nut adjusted, You put the lock in place, that holds it. Then you put this star lock on, which also has a tab to go in the slot. Then when you get it on, you get your outside nut on. Get your outside nut on, you bend the tab over, that holds your outside nut in place. So that secures your axle nuts so you don't have to worry about those falling off going down the road. Nobody likes a set of duals coming off the truck at 65 miles an hour going down the highway, particularly the people in the other car that it's coming at. So, we've got that loose, hopefully within look. Ah, yeah. We're going to take our outer bearing out. We're going to be happy that I did not eat breakfast this morning. And we're going to take that drum off. Now, this looks completely different to what we were just working with. And I'll take a minute to say, this type drum is called an outboard drum. If you notice, we did not have to mess with the hub to take this off. There are buds which have inboard drums. They're on the inside. The Dayton spoke wheels have the drums on the inside. To access the brakes, you have to take the bearings off. Have to disturb your seal. Whatever you do, don't ever, ever, ever reuse your seal. That's too hard a work to risk getting oil on your shoes and mess everything up later. So, with that apart, we now have to, if you notice, these shoes have no rollers, no pins. They only have 2 springs holding them together. So, our trusty vice grips. I'm sure there's a special tool made for this that hasn't been made in 50 years or so. So we're going to attempt to undo a brake spring. And after doing that, we should be able to get enough slack to get our shoes off. And if you'll notice, this shoe is significantly different to this shoe. There's a lot more friction surface on the cam brake than the wedge brake. At the time, with everything working perfectly and adjusted properly, the wedge brake would offer the same amount of stopping capacity as the cam brake. However, that lasted until the second time you put your foot on the pedal, and it no longer worked that good. So, with that said, if you notice this side, which we took apart, there is there's the same one on this side, which will come apart. This is the adjuster. And you reach in there with a little bar and rotate that, and it screws out. And that's how you adjust your brake. But you have to have some sort of a little crooked bar to be able to reach inside from the back and do that on these wedge brakes. Don't plan on running out to the parts store and buying some of these. The kit with 2 adjusters, 2 plungers, rubber parts, and a few other miscellaneous pieces with the springs. There are a couple of places that still have them, and that kit's right at $1,000 to do 1 wheel. I had a serious problem because out of 4 springs, I had 1 that was not broken. And I was trying to figure out how I'm going to make this work. A spring kit is $228, which unfortunately, I like y'all, but I think y'all could use your imagination for $228. So, browsing eBay, I found an open kit that had the springs in it that looked like they'd work. I took a chance and ordered it for $30. Lo and behold, I got an opened kit with springs, plungers, everything. So I was planning to bring that with me. It was raining. It wound up staying at home, and I came to York. So there again, I have a nice box with a bunch of new parts in it, aside from the new springs, which I robbed out. These, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, exactly. This is a Bendix Twinplex. There's a couple of different Bendixes. If you have wedge brakes and you have some money you want to spend and you tear into it, look at your parts. Look at your adjusters. The chambers are pretty well universal. All of the actuating parts are specific, and Bendix had, I know of 3 different versions. Rockwell had at least 2. I'm sure there are others out there, but make sure you get parts that fit what you have. I just happened to find there are dozens of, if you search wedge brake kit on eBay, there are dozens of parts kits that come up. There was one that it just said wedge brake kit, but it had my springs for the Bendix Twinplex. This axle is a 1969 model, came off a 1969 Great Dane reefer. That axle is a 1980 model, came off a Barrett cattle trailer. And even though they're kind of the same era, there's that much difference in the two. So now you kind of see the parts that are involved with a wedge brake versus a cam brake. We see how to change the anchor pin style shoes to modern style shoes. The shoes like we use today are available absolutely anywhere. Our local parts store, it's like $15 a shoe. There's no reason to take a wheel apart and not put new shoes on it. That's cheap insurance.
When you do a brake job, you put spring kits too?
They typically come with them.
But I mean, a new spring kit.
Yes. I like to do that because I've had a spring break and hang in the drum, and it messed up my drum, my shoe. It could have been really bad, so it's cheap insurance. Typically, this came in a box of 2 shoes and a spring kit. The hardware kit was all in a box. So to do a quick brake job, slide the drum off, change your shoes, flip your cam over as long as everything's tight. The trucks that I run every day, I keep a mental note of where we're at with cams. I don't let cam bushings get too worn. I usually get 3 sets of shoes per set of cam bushings. I run steel drums as opposed to cast iron drums. I usually get 3 sets of shoes per drum.
We have trailers. And you
Yes,
only look at them once a year.
Exactly.
So
Yes. And I've got hopper bottom that's the same way. I don't think about it until it's harvest season and time to hook to it and go. And whenever the farmer calls and said, we're ready to start cutting soybeans, I have to tell him, give me a day, because that trailer's coming up to the shop and I'm gonna put air to it and I'm gonna check everything that we did here, make sure those brakes are gonna work whenever I get it fully loaded and a car decides to pull out right in front of me and I have to stop. I don't want to have to explain to the nice trooper why I couldn't stop. So, yes, sir. Anybody have any questions on the mess that I've made here in the floor today? Yes, sir. Yes,
There's
sir.
only 120 thousandths of wear before the drums wore out.
Exactly.
A good rule of thumb is to replace the drums, it depends on how you use the truck or trailer, every other brake shoe.
And it also depends on the type of shoe.
Right.
If you run higher grade brake shoes, you're going to have to replace drums more frequently because the higher grade has more metallic in it. It's going to eat the drums.
And the difference you can tell on the brake shoe itself is the weight of it. All brake shoes are made out of compressed fibers. The heavier that brake shoe is, it'll last longer, but it's harder on drums.
Exactly.
But-
And it'll squeal.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Since
Oh, you
Bidenomics,
throw a little grease on it.
There you go. That's all the problem.
since Bidenomics, a drum like that used to be like $42, and now they're like $250.
Well, they're a little bit, but the price of everything goes up. I'm sure your freight prices have gone up to match.
Yeah, they do. I sell them every day because it's unreal.
Yep. This is a cast iron drum. That's pretty much the universal standard. That drum is, like you say, around $150. There's also a steel drum, a centrifuge drum. I personally like those, and that's what I run. I just bought 8 at one time. Kenworth ran a special on them for $99.99 each, so I bought 8 of them and put them in stock. Sometimes you can catch a deal like that, and it's worthwhile to cash in. Steel drum, issue with the cast iron drum, it doesn't dissipate the heat quite as well as a steel. It will swell and eventually crack. Steel will not crack. It'll swell, but it'll come right back. You don't have break fade with a steel drum the way you do with a cast iron drum. A hobby truck, cast iron's fine. You're trying to save money. If you're in hilly country and you're pulling a trailer with a couple other trucks on it, you might want to consider steel drums. You'll probably notice the difference. Yes, sir.
I worked for a guy back 72 or 3, ordered a 4300 from the local dealer. Came in with wedge brakes and refused to take it. And so another guy bought it. And they ran it until it made it reline, cut it all off and put S-cam.
That used to be a big thing. People just were scared to death of wedge brakes. And unfortunately, they kind of got a bad rap because you see how difficult it is to adjust it for a guy that's used to cam brakes. I have a trailer, an old C&H Transport drop deck with wedge brakes on it. And I pulled it a few times and, oh yeah, these are wedge brakes. Start thinking you're going to stop 4 miles before you get there. And my dad, this is what dads are for, said, why don't you adjust them? That's all that's wrong with them. I said, well, how do you do that? So we climbed under the trailer and he gave me a stool on adjusting the brakes. He had the proper tool the proper little crooked bar to do it with. There again, my infinite wisdom, I left that at home. We adjusted the brakes. The next time I took the trailer out, I stepped on the pedal to stop like I normally would with a cam brake trailer and about threw myself through the windshield. It stops amazingly well with just an adjustment. And a lot of times that's all it needs is an adjustment.
Supposed to be self-adjusting?
No, they were more forgiving because they had more travel to a certain point, but you still had to adjust it because it will run out of travel eventually. A lot of people put them on and ran them and never adjusted it, period. So
I wonder how the state patrol inspected those.
he was,
They inspected the travel.
well, if you look back in the inspection specifications for around 68, 69, when it was ICC, they actually had a spec for clearance of shoe to drum, and that's what they would check. So nowadays, if you pulled up to a scale and had this, they either A, would tell you to keep going because they had no idea what it was, or they would ground you and say, that's not a brake. Depends on which inspector you got that day. So, yes, sir.
On an old truck. I had a 73 white Freightliner. The S-cam, took them all off, spent about 4 hours per axle because the truck had sit up like 20 years. Pulled it all off, cleaned everything up, stuck the S-cam back in, cleaned out some old grease and stuff. Okay, if you can't turn that easy, you can't turn that S-cam easy, if you have to have a pipe wrench to turn it, your air's
It's not
gonna
gonna release.
move. Air's not gonna move.
Air puts it on. Those two little springs is what makes it contract.
Yes. You need to
It
be
is not
able
going
to
to release
turn
on its
that
own.
easy, or you're gonna be redoing it. So just keep that in mind on old trucks. And they make a thing to hone out that bushing. You can either put in new bushings. But I'm telling you, if you have to have a pipe wrench to turn it in place to match up your brake pads, your air is not going to move that brake, and you are going to have to redo it.
Yes, sir. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate everybody's attendance. Appreciate y'all watching me make a mess here on the floor. I'm going to run out the door before anybody sees us and claim I have no idea what happened here. Appreciate it if y'all keep me anonymous. It was some guy in there that was doing it. But I appreciate y'all coming. Appreciate y'all coming to the convention. I hope you will attend some of our other presentations. We have some really good things going on. Mr. Steve Roseman here is getting ready to do the history of Corbett trucks. If there's ever been an authority on something, it is Mr. Steve Roseman on Corbett. So that is going to be a treat. Go ahead and cover your face up. That's fine.
We need you in there to tell us how to hook all this computer stuff up.
I'm coming. Let me wipe my
Wash
hands.
your hands.
Well, if it's my computer, it wouldn't matter. Thank y'all again.